Gata for the sound of the bell. Mind calm, body at ease, breathing quiet, sentiment benevolent. Dharma friends, sitting still in vital silence, wanting nothing, we practice eco-Buddhism together. The sound of the temple bell booms for all to cease from conflict. May the way of Buddha usher in the dawn of non-violent global village forever. Here is the after sound of the bell. Thunder of silence, light after Dharma rain. Amoga. Varochana Mahamudra. Mani Padme Jvala Pravartaya.
We stand for the chanting of the refuges. It gives me such joy for the four of us to chant wholeheartedly here. I hope you're also enjoying out there. Let's now do the three refuges, these three jewels in this English version. I go for Buddha, no, I go for refuge to the Buddha.
I go for refuge to the Buddha
And resolve with all beings.
and resolve with all beings.
I will cultivate a heart of enlightenment.
I will cultivate a heart of enlightenment
And realize the great way.
and realize the great way.
I go for refuge to the Dharma.
I go for refuge to the Dharma
And resolve with all beings.
and resolve with all beings.
I will penetrate the teachings.
I will penetrate the teachings
And uncover oceans of wisdom.
and uncover oceans of wisdom.
I go for refuge to the Sangha.
I go for refuge to the Sangha
And resolve with all beings.
and resolve with all beings.
I will seek peace and happiness for the many.
I will seek peace and happiness for the many
And transform this world into Buddha lands unimpeded.
and transform this world into Buddha lands unimpeded.
Good. English is good too. So please now return to your meditation mats and cushions or chairs, however you're doing your meditation, for about 5 minutes. And then we'll come back together for a talk from Jagwa, one of our senior Dharma students. Good morning to the 10 directions wherever you are. It's overcast here in Arbor. Candles burning. And small joys each day as we head toward the coming back of the light later this month. Welcome this morning, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to Jagwa Kelly Davenport, who's going to give the Dharma talk this morning. Jagwa has been in training programs here for several years. I think this is her fourth. She did a year as, maybe fifth, almost 2 years as a Dharma guardian, and then she came into the seminary program, and she's our most senior student at this time. And she and her husband, and she'll describe this, lead a beautifully simple life in their little place, not too far from the temple. And I asked her what her topic was this morning, and she said, oh, everyday life things. And I decided that I would put it in this expression. There's this place in some of our little liturgies that comes out with the way of Buddha is everyday life. And everyday life is the way of Buddha. So let's see what Jagwa has to share with us.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Haju, for that introduction. And before I begin, I wanted to invite you to do something with your hands while you listen to this talk. I'm going to be talking about handwork, working with our hands, and embodiment in our practice, sort of in our daily life, as Haju said. And I found that sometimes it's very regulating to the nervous system just to be doing a little bit of work by hand. So perhaps you have a button that fell off a shirt, as my husband brought to me this morning. I sewed a button back on, and I was feeling a little bit nervous about giving this talk, so that helped. Or maybe you like to knit. I've been in some Zoom meetings lately where people are quietly knitting in the background, and I always like to see that. And also, I know many people did not learn these skills as a child. I myself did not. They might have been more common a generation or two ago. So that's okay too, if you don't have any work to do by hand. Just take a moment to feel yourself in your body. What are your feet doing? How is your spine feeling this morning? And maybe your shoulders, like mine, always need a little bit of coaxing to relax. So thank you for our teachers for inviting me to give this talk. I gave a version of it a couple of weeks ago for a really wonderful writing workshop taught by one of our Sangha members, Holly Wren Spalding. Her Buddhist name is Sankat, and she lives in Maine right now. And because we read some wonderful poems in that workshop, I wanted to start with a couple of poems this morning. So this first poem is to honor that longing of wishing that we could be together, even though we are together, just in a different way than we may even yet be used to as this pandemic continues. I know I miss very much being able to see your faces, and it always feels a little awkward to be giving a talk into my laptop camera. So I wanted to honor that feeling. This poem is called You, Reader, As I Imagine You by Chase Twitchell, who herself is a Zen practitioner in New York. Why is it awkward to acknowledge each other's presence here? Who says we can't meet in public, can't stop and sit together on a bench and watch the dogs go by? As a child, I looked for you in books and sometimes sensed you, reading what I was reading. Even as a child, I knew you would someday come to this place to meet me. And then now maybe a bit more thematically to what I would like to talk about today, which is simple domestic work and working with the hands. I wanted to share a little bit of writing by Layman Pang. Layman Pang was a renowned Buddhist practitioner around the 700 to 800s Common Era, who was not an ordained person, as his name suggests. In fact, his whole family were quite dedicated practitioners. And you may remember hearing about them at a Dharma talk that Haju gave a few years ago, which was the first time I think that I was introduced to the Pang family, in which Haju told the story of Layman Pang deciding to cut his worldly ties after he retired, somewhat as a wealthy man, by putting all of his belongings in a little boat and sinking it in a lake. So here's a passage from Layman Pang, translated by Ruth Fuller Sasaki. My daily affairs are quite ordinary, but I'm in total harmony with them. I don't hold on to anything, don't reject anything. Nowhere an obstacle or conflict. Who cares about wealth or honor? Even the poorest thing shines. My miraculous power and spiritual activity, drawing water and carrying wood. So, as many of you know, I am a student in our Dharma training program. And at one of our first meetings, just after the pandemic had become a reality in our country, and we had transitioned to meeting virtually, the group of us students were talking about some challenges of homeschooling, kind of broadly speaking. Literally, for those who have children learning in virtual school, homeschooling in the sense of practicing maybe alone, where before we had the physical presence of each other, our teachers and our Sangha to help inspire us and help keep up our energy. And then maybe also homeschooling in the sense of getting hit over the head with all of the chores of running a household for one or more people every day, all the meals that needed cooking and the dishes that needed washing, etc. And as someone who was not homeschooled, I always have sort of romanticized that word because it, to me, has a sense of ease about it, or at least it did maybe before the pandemic, a sense of following your curiosity, learning on the job, so to speak. And I seem to remember one of our Dharma teachers or priests, and I can't remember now who it was, telling me a couple of years ago that the Dharma is on the job training. So maybe in that sense of homeschool training too. So today for my talk, I just wanted to share a little bit about what homeschooling my practice has looked like over the last few months, and maybe what is perhaps my version of Layman Pang's drawing water and carrying firewood. And that is working by hand, specifically quilting, sewing, a little bread baking. And I want to talk about these things in the context of how this everyday work can teach us about Buddhist faith. So this spring, I started making a quilt. I didn't really know anything about quilting, but I felt like I needed to make something out of nothing. And it has felt like a year of collecting up scraps of normalcy or human contact or old routines and trying to patch something together that's new, that can work for us. All I knew about quilts is that you take some scraps of fabric that you have on hand and you make something bigger out of them. So I read some tutorials online and I settled on a classic kind of simple pattern called a 9-patch. So you cut evenly, shaped squares and then sew them in rows of 3 across, 3 down to make a block of 9 squares. So then you just keep going, making these blocks until you have enough to make a quilt. And so I have the first block here that I made. See if you can see it. You can see it's a little crooked on the bottom because it took me a while to figure out how to make the seams line up evenly so that it would be square. And at first it kind of annoyed me. I thought, well, maybe I'll take it apart and redo it. And then the more I looked at it, I kind of liked that it was a little wonky. it has that organic quality. And to me, it sort of spoke to the time period in which it was made, with all of us going through a lot of change and upheaval this year, in many senses of the word. So I got interested in this idea of making a quilt for maybe a few reasons. One was that I had just finished sewing my casa, which is the ceremonial garment that you will see our teachers and senior students wearing in our tradition. And of course, there's an equivalent in many other religious traditions. There are different sizes and shapes and colors. And this is the one that I made, which you can kind of see. It's a little square. And Buddhist ceremonial garments frequently include some form of patchwork or stitching to evoke patchwork, to remind us of the patched robes of the Buddha and his original followers, the monks and nuns. They are said to have sewed their robes from scraps of fabric, some of which were taken from bodies laid to rest in burial grounds. And I had been sewing for a couple of years at this point on a sewing machine, and I had tried a couple of times to sew something by hand, like a patch or something. And I just didn't feel that I had any coordination at it. I was always sticking myself with the needle, and my fingers felt really clumsy. From several years ago, I still have a very strong memory of my first long meditation retreat, our Youngman Jungjin, in which my work practice assignment was to sew some patches on some cotton pants that Haju had given me. And she spent 3 very patient hours trying to teach me how to sew by hand for the first time, and I was really awful at it. So when Haju asked me to sew the casa by hand as much as possible, I thought, it will take forever. But what I found actually is that my hands learned pretty quickly, and my eye learned judging how to align the seams of the fabric, how to kind of reverse engineer the casa, because I was making it without a pattern. So I had an existing one to follow, and then I had to figure out with tissue paper and things like that how to kind of reverse engineer it. And when I was sewing by hand, I noticed that similar to a meditation sitting, I felt more incorporated in my body. My mind and my body came together in one place rather than my frequent state of being in 2 places at once, with my mind in some future or past and my body doing whatever it might be doing in that moment. And so I looked up this word incorporated. I like to look up the etymologies of words, because it's always interesting to see what language they originated in, what the deeper root meaning is. And so incorporated comes from the Latin root word of corpus, or body. So in other words, coming into the body. And so sewing the casa inspired me to make the quilt as much by hand too. I did use the machine for some of the quilt top, but I really liked this sensation of being incorporated, and I was interested in exploring that further. And sewing the casa also gave me some confidence in my hands themselves that I could learn. They started to become more dexterous, paying attention to the small details of how big the knot needs to be on the end of the thread so that it doesn't just pull clean through the fabric, for example. So I started making the quilt in spring this year, although spring in Michigan, as many of you know, is really just sort of the end of winter. So it's a very good time to start a quilt because it's still cold. And I had been at home at that point pretty much full time since March. Working remotely on my computer and sharing space with my partner, who's also working remotely on the computer. And so I had almost this compulsion to do something active with my hands, to let my hands travel where I couldn't, and to feel some sense of ease in that kind of work. And luckily, because I had been sewing some garments over the last couple of years, I had a whole box full of scraps from various garment sewing projects. And so luckily, quilting is a wonderful tradition of making things out of scraps. And so I had a good place to start. And it's funny, when I was starting to put together some notes for this talk, as often happens when I'm interested in a topic, it feels like the universe just sends me other little bits of inspiration that I wouldn't have otherwise noticed. And I happened to see online, there was an art gallery in Chicago that was going to be hosting a talk that very week by some women from Gee's Bend, Alabama, which is famous for its long history of African-American quilting. And so I was able to sign up for another Zoom meeting and listen to these women talk about their quilt making. And one of the women said that if you look at the quilts they've made in Gee's Bend over the years, you could see the years that they had money to buy good cloth and the years that they just made quilts from rags or whatever was lying around. And I really liked this idea of quilts as sort of this history of resilience. If you held them up next to each other, maybe they would evoke tree rings where you can see time passing and what the conditions of those times were. And so as I was learning to quilt, I was learning something about embodiment practice too, I think. And I mentioned that I also bake bread. I like to bake sourdough bread. And similar to baking with the task of sewing or quilting, you really have to learn to trust your own senses. And the only way to learn to trust in those is to just have repetition. So especially with bread, right? You have no idea when it's ready to bake at first. So you bake it too soon and then it's underproofed, or you bake it too late and then it's overproofed. And so you have to really get a sense of how to judge the proof of a loaf of bread, just using all of your senses. Maybe you're smelling it, you're poking it, feeling how heavy it weighs. Do you see any light gas bubbles forming on the surface of the dough that would show that it is almost ready to bake? So all of this gets synthesized in your body over time, and then your body knows how to respond. This loaf is ready to bake. This loaf needs more time. And one of the bakers I really admire, Tara Jensen, says that bread should look like it came from somewhere. So I think that somewhere is really your own physical practice, your body. So same with sewing, learning to see how different fabrics need to be treated, how to work with different seams and finishes and that kind of thing. And one of the quilters who really inspires me has a little bit to say about this process of sort of recognizing your own wisdom. Her name is Grace Rother, and she wrote an essay on her blog called No Rules Quilting, which was really helpful for me to read starting out too, because quilting in some regards does have a lot of rules, or could. And so her essay was about her experience coming out as gay as a teenager and falling in love with quilting as a way of really kind of coming home to herself. So I'll read just an excerpt of that. So she writes, "I will tell you the biggest secret I have learned about making quilts. There is no secret. The urgency of the shoulds and musts is a lie. You don't need any of it. A quilt is fabric held together with stitches. Everything else is your choice. There are no rules. You won't know how to make one until you try. You won't know what patterns will make your brain hum until you try them. You won't know if you like to make it up or follow a plan until you're in the middle of it, lost or sailing. You won't know how far apart your stitches will be until you put them in, and you won't know if you like them until you see them. Your quilts won't look like you until you make your own rules, and no one can give you that. That starts with peeling back the iron grip of learned white supremacy, of internalized homophobia, of misogyny, and learning to trust your own self at your soft core." And so I like that sort of manifesto quality of that passage. And I think perhaps the Buddhist equivalent can be drawn from a saying that you may have heard around the temple and other Dharma talks. Haju is fond of saying, all that we need to know is contained within this one fathom length body. And a fathom is a unit of measurement that we don't tend to use that much these days. Maybe I think it's actually a seafaring measurement, but it's about 6 feet. So all that we need to know is contained within this one fathom length body. And the first time that I heard this, I felt almost a strange sense of relief. This invitation to trust in yourself. So I wanted to go back and see what the origin of this phrase was. And I was able to find a little snippet of a sutra from the Anguttara Nikaya Sutra, which I believe this comes from. So I'll read the longer version because it's also very rich. Thus have I heard, the end of the world can never be reached by walking. However, without having reached the world's end, there is no release from suffering. I declare that it is in this fathom-long carcass with its perceptions and thoughts that there is the world, the origin of the world, the cessation of the world, and the path leading to the cessation of the world. So let me read it one more time. Thus have I heard, the end of the world can never be reached by walking. However, without having reached the world's end, there is no release from suffering. I declare that it is in this fathom-long carcass, with its perceptions and thoughts, that there is the world, the origin of the world, the cessation of the world, and the path leading to the cessation of the world. So I think this is pretty revolutionary, or it speaks to my heart in that way. The Buddha, I think, is saying that our awakening is in the capacity of our own human life, our own body, mind, which conditions all of these things that we encounter in our life. And to befriend that body, mind, and to see it as more incorporated and to learn from it allows us to develop that capacity for wisdom as human beings and how to relate to other people. And that last section is interesting. I took a look at that a little bit more closely, where he says the origin of the world, the cessation of the world, and the path leading to the cessation of the world. And I think that is, in a sense, an echo of the Four Noble Truths. We could say perhaps the world in that case represents the truth that living beings experience suffering. The origin of the world, our response to our suffering contributes to it, or can. That an end to suffering is possible, the cessation of the world, and that the path to reducing that suffering, both ours and that of other people, is to practice balance in our speech, our conduct, our livelihood, which you likely know as the Eightfold Path. So if I can connect something as plain and humble as sewing a quilt to the Four Noble Truths, I think the connection is in the body. By becoming connected to the consciousness that lives in the whole body and not just in the brain, which I think is a lot of what we learn and practice in our meditation. But maybe that vehicle for you is your meditation practice, but it could also be washing the dishes or working with needle and thread. And through that vehicle, we are developing that capacity to observe, to accept what we are observing, and to understand our experience of the world. Ultimately, I think so that we can trust in our ability to respond to what is needed. And so if someone were to ask me, then what is the Buddhist conception of faith? I think that it's something like that, or at least that's what I would say right now, trusting in our Buddha nature, which we are always discovering both in ourselves and in other people. So we have a little bit of time left, and before I make a couple of final remarks, I wanted to invite you to participate in a body scan meditation, just a short one. I've used this recently when I felt really cooped up and trapped at home. I adapted this from a really wonderful little book called Breathing Through the Whole Body by Will Johnson. And so I kind of expanded on an idea that he started his body scan with. And I'm focusing it specifically on the head. And I like this because it's, at least for me, really difficult to remember that the head is actually part of our body rather than just being our thinking mind. And I often feel like a talking head these days because I spend so much time on the computer and in video conferences. And so this meditation is intended to help us remember that the head is part of the body and to see how that part of our body is feeling. So I'll just have a little drink of water and maybe pay some attention to your posture. You could allow your eyes to close or just be soft and half closed. If you're sitting, see if you can adjust your seat bones so that your spine can really straighten and stack over them. Maybe you like to sit cross-legged if this helps support the spine and the weight of the head. And then bringing one hand to your chest, checking in with your heartbeat and your breathing. Staying for a few moments until you begin to notice your breath or your heartbeat. Perhaps they slow down just a touch. Now turn your attention to the very top of your head, focusing on an area no bigger than a large coin, just at the top of the head. Noticing whatever sensations can be felt in just this small area. Maybe you notice tingling, a sense of vibration, aching, light, heavy, cool, pulsing, painful, dull, warm, or something else. Once you're able to feel a distinct sensation at the top of your head, begin to broaden your focus outwards slowly, 1/8 of an inch at a time, until you can feel your entire scalp. Now, bring your awareness down to your ears, the hard cartilage at the top of the ear, the fleshy part of the earlobe, perhaps even the whorl of the ear canal and inner ear. Begin to travel from the ears to the temples, resting at the soft indentation at either side of the head. Let your awareness travel to the crest of the brow and the eyebrow. If you notice any lingering tension or a habit of squinting, breathe into those muscles and invite them to relax. Now we come to the eyes in the eye sockets. If your eyes are closed, invite them to get a little heavier in the eye socket. Maybe the top of the cheekbone just below the eye socket can relax. Traveling from the eyes down to the bridge of the nose, the fleshy part of the nose and nostrils. Noticing the sensation of air at the front and back of the nostrils, where it may be a little cool. Now bringing your attention to the curve of the jaw, perhaps relaxing the teeth apart, lips closed or gently parted, and travel your attention along the length of the jaw to the lips. Shining that attention at the lips, which may often feel warm. And then sending any warmth generated by this scan of your head down into your neck, letting it feel warm and supported. Resting in this ease you may have generated through this body scan, just taking a slow, easy breath and allowing your eyes to open again if they were closed. Bowing to you all. I can't see you, but I hope that you feel a little bit more centered and embodied. Sometimes it's interesting to see how the head feels when we remember it's part of our body. I know sometimes it takes a while for me when I do that to even notice anything but kind of a dull sensation on the top of my head until I really focus there. And then I notice there's a lot going on actually in the skin. So just to end our time together today, I wanted to return to this spirit of homeschooling our practice. In other words, working with our body, minds, in our daily life. Nothing special or exotic, just finding opportunities to discover wisdom. And I think especially when, depending on the type of work that you do, this may or may not be true for you, but many of us are largely isolated from other people right now. And so I also want to encourage each of you to continue to find maybe opportunities to adapt your practice to whatever circumstances you find yourself in. It could be a lot of chaos at home right now. It could be loneliness, something else. And as Haju said, and sort of presaged what I was thinking, of course, which is our wonderful saying, the way of Buddha is ordinary life, and ordinary life is the way of Buddha. And as Haju often says, even more simply, everything counts. So I encourage each of you to find a home for your practice, whatever form that might take within your physical home right now, especially right now during this pandemic, and find out what counts for you. So that's all that I had to share today, and making a bow. I wish I could see all of your faces, but thank you for being here, and I will turn it back over to Ann Arbor for any announcements.
Okay, thank you very much, Jagwa. Thank you very much. So let's remember some of the offerings that Jagwa made in these next few weeks. While we are at home, there are so many ways that we can use our bodies and enjoy our life when we are able to also expand from just being talking heads. Yeah. So last week, Marum and Hayun and I talked to you about the resources, that we hope we can make available for you, because sometimes it may feel a little resourceless out there. But the resources of the Dharma are here for you and really can make a difference to everything else you do. So let's hear from, sorry, I'm not speaking loud enough. I got the signal. I'd like to just announce that the announcements, which are going to be resources for you in the Dharma. And as you resource yourself in the Dharma, you resource your whole life, because there's something about the great presence that comes when our whole body is sensing on our behalf, moment by moment. So dear Hayun, what have we got?
Okay, dear Haju,
Here comes the camera.
here comes the camera. Thank you, Jagwa. So we have Dharma offerings of many kinds. I'm going to focus on 3 today. The first is the Dharma of meditation. On Wednesday evenings, we are beginning to offer once again our Wednesday evening sittings, but they look a little differently now than they used to for those of you who have attended Wednesday evening sittings in our temple or Chicago or elsewhere. This time we have one sitting. We do the long version of the refuges together. We chant the song of meditation, and then we have a Dharma discussion, which is really rich. We had our first session this past Wednesday, and it was a beautiful discussion, just really with 3 words. Sit, still, listen.
Sit still, rest.
Sit still, rest. Yes, 3 words. I was not correct on the 3rd. How easily we forget. And so each week we're going to have a Dharma topic. And so it's an interactive place for us all to talk together. So we really recommend that you might want to try this. It's available to people who are beginning and to people who are more experienced practitioners. So it's at 6:30 p.m. and you can come to our website and we'll send you a Zoom link, our email address, I mean. Our email address is AnnArborZenTemple@gmail.com. So just let us know and we will send you a Zoom link for the Wednesday evening sitting. The second opportunity for the Dharma is in our weekly work practice here. We still are doing an outdoor work practice, weather permitting, from 3 to 5 p.m. on Saturday afternoon. So if you're someone who likes to work with your hands, get dirty, get in the garden, help us get things ready for the holidays, then please come and you'll, I think, have a very rich time. If you saw the e-bulletin this week, we just pulled in like a huge branch from a pine tree, which we're going to be decorating for the end of year. So we really invite you to come for that. And the third opportunity for Dharma is in our generosity offerings. We're going to be sending to you, you may have gotten it already, our annual fundraising appeal from the temple. And I encourage you to read it carefully because Haji Sunim took a lot of care to sort of talk to you about all that we've been doing and continue to do to keep the Dharma alive and the temple vibrant during these times of pandemic. And it's a lot when you read it. I just got mine in the mail the other day. So please take a look at it, and please consider being generous to the temple, as you always are. We're so appreciative of your financial gifts, your time gifts, your thoughts when you send us emails of encouragement, and we send those back to you. So we're very grateful, and thank you for everything you do to keep the Dharma, to keep the Sangha, and to keep the temple alive these days. I'm going to send it back to Haji Sunim to lead us in the 4 great vows. So we have to move the camera now.
Stop. There we go. Yeah. I also wanted to mention that we're having a retreat coming up December 26th to 30th with our Dharma master, Duan Sunam. And that is open to our members. And so if you're interested in participating for all or part of the time, again, write to us at Ann Arbor at zenbuddhisttemple.org.com.
Oh no, it's Ann Arbor Zen Temple at gmail.com.
At gmail.com. You'd think I would know. So that we can make arrangements and give you a little bit of orientation. And we have some ideas for practice periods, which we'll be letting you know of they're starting in January. It's a good idea to subscribe to our e-bulletin, because everything that we do is in there, plus the way to get in touch with it. So if you are not receiving our e-bulletin, or perhaps you don't read it all the time, I suggest you do, because there's lots of good information of Dharma resources for you, and Sangha resources for you, Buddha resources for you. Okay, so let's finish with the 4 great vows. All beings, one body.
All beings, one body.
I vow to liberate.
I vow to liberate.
Blind passions, one root.
Blind passions, one root.
I vow to terminate.
I vow to terminate.
Dharma gates, one mind.
Dharma gates, one mind.
I vow to penetrate.
I vow to penetrate.
The great way of Buddha.
The great way of Buddha.
I vow to realize.
I vow to realize.
Hope to see you next week, and in the meantime, please be in touch, especially if you need some assistance or you have questions.